Hello again, welcome to beginners fiddle lesson number 3. Today we're going to be looking at the scale of G. Before I do so, there are a couple of things I want to point out to you about the violin mechanics, the fiddle mechanics. Things like the way that you wind your strings on, etc. So I'll cut in now with a quick overview of those points. It's useful to wind your strings onto the pegs so that they sort of force themselves into the peg box and it prevents the strings from slipping. The bridge should be lined up with the F-hole nicks. In other words, you can see on this diagram here how I've got the bridge lined up with those little notches in the F-holes. The bridge should also be either vertical or slightly leaning back towards the tailpiece, as you can see in this photo. And finally, try to line your strings up so they're either parallel with the edge of the fingerboard or slightly tapering in, but certainly not too wide. And fine tuners, of course, very important. Try and keep those as high as possible so you've got plenty of room for adjusting the strings. Now that we've covered that, let's just go back to looking at the scale of G. Now if you look at the screen, you'll see the scale presented in notation, and you'll see that the G is the very bottom note and it has two stave lines running through it which actually aren't shown on the main stave. It drops below the main stave, which is a little bit strange, but in actual fact we can't go any lower than the G. So if you try and memorise what that note looks like, that's quite useful. There are certain key points with learning to read notation. And I think what it's useful to do is to try and learn 2 or 3 notes and remember what they look like, and then the notes in between kind of follow on. So if you remember what the G looks like, and perhaps the C is the 3rd note along on the G string. That's the C. Now once again it's below the bottom of the stave, but you'll notice there's only one little stave line running through that, so it's quite a memorable sort of shape to remember, and that's the C. And then once you're onto the stave, of course, it should become slightly easier to remember what the notes actually look like and what they sound like on the violin fingerboard. So starting from the bottom again, let's work our way up through the G scale. We're going to go from the G string to the D string to the A string to the E string. Ready? 3, 4. Open D. And that's 1 octave. And then carry on to the open A. Now we're on the E string. Now we work our way back down again. Now you need to try and practice that, because intonation, which is a word basically meaning trying to get the right notes sounding correct. Intonation is important. In other words, you don't want to sound like this. That would be incorrect. You want to try and keep on the correct notes. Now we could spend 25 minutes just practicing the G scale, but I think we'd all get fed up. So we might as well move on a little, because let's just recap on what we did in the last lesson. We looked at trying to make sure we hit the right, or bowed the right notes when we played open strings. Okay, so that's a nice little exercise to do as well. So you could perhaps all useful things. Basically, it's helping your coordination and your muscle memory, which is so important at this stage. So the scale of G, basically there is one sharp in this this key, and basically is F sharp. I'll point that out. That's the A, that's the G, that's the A, that's the B, C, D, E. Now this is the F. That's actually a sharp. Normally the natural F, which is when it's not a sharp, would be that one. But at the moment we're going to play F sharp. Carry on. Now when we play the F on the E string, that's also a sharp. That's the first note on the E string, that's an F sharp. A natural would sound like this, but the sharp is that one. Whoops, mistake. Now, did I make that mistake on purpose? Of course I did, because we learn from mistakes. Well, that's my story and I'm going to try and stick to it. But we do learn from mistakes, so don't be too discouraged if when you're playing it sounds, you've got to make a lot of errors and mistakes to gradually improve. So that's quite important. Now we have a tune to play, and it will just help to reinforce the idea of playing on the lower strings and looking at the notation at the same time. It also introduces a new note length. This time it's called a quaver. You'll notice on the musical notation that there are two notes that are joined together with a line. Now those are called half notes or quavers. So whereas with crotchets, the very first note in the measure, the first measure, which is worth 1 beat in a 4-beat bar or measure, a quaver is worth half a beat. So if you were going to count that out, that first measure, you would go 1, 2 and 3, 4 and. I'll play the tune first so you can hear it. So I'll play through it now and I'll count through it at the same time. 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4. Did you catch the minim at the end, which is worth 2 regular beats? Play it again. 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and. So let's just play it together. 3, 4. repeat. Now that's an exercise again that you can play because it teaches you how to work on the lower strings, and of course the G string is quite hard when you're first learning the fiddle to get your hand in the right position to be able to play, and also to be able to play the notes nice and clearly with the bow somewhere between the fingerboard and the bridge. It would be ideal if you can try and keep it halfway in between, and also trying to get the intonation correct. Don't worry about which way the bow direction is going at the moment, because we're more or less considering how to play the tune and not too concerned about bow direction. It doesn't really matter with the fiddle music as such. It's more when you're playing a classical style of music that bow direction becomes more important. Now moving on, you can also play this same tune now, the same scale, but you can move up a string. You'll see now I've changed the musical notation, and we're now going to start on the G, which was an octave above the open G. So we're starting now with our ring finger on the third note of the D string. Okay, we'll play exactly the same tune. Here we are, I'll play it for you. Okay, so I will play it quite a bit slower for you so you can play along. 3, 4. Again. Now, let's go to the lower octave now, starting on the G again, the open G. 3, 4. Now shift up to the next octave. Very good. So that's a complete tune now, and we've kept in the scale of G. We haven't gone into any of the other scales, but we've simply gone 2 octaves. Now that's quite useful. It's worth knowing that, because certainly as a composer of fiddle tunes, for me it's very useful, because if I write a tune in the scale of G, I know that I can play the upper part and the lower part with 2 recordings of fiddles. In other words, I can play perhaps this, and I can also play it down here. It's great fun because it makes the violin ring out. It gives it an extra tone because you're playing two notes in unison but they're an octave apart. So if you've got a recorder, a computer that you can record with, it's quite good fun to do things like that with the key of G. You might even be able to do it on your mobile phone. This has got a recorder that I've used, but I haven't worked out how to double track on it as yet. But I can certainly do one recording, play that back and then play the other part on the violin at the same time, which is good fun and it's good practice. So what we've got today, we've got the scale of G. We've got that to practice. We've also got this. And we've also got this. All those things are useful. If you keep practicing, how often should you practice? Every day, if possible, if you can find the time. I know there are all sorts of things crop up, unexpected incidents, but if you can find the time, even if it's just 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I mean this video probably will only last 15-20 minutes, and it's been useful. It's useful to practice every day. Why? Well, it just sharpens you up. It keeps your intonation correct. It keeps your muscle memory going, as it were. It keeps your coordination intact. It's also very good exercise. You may notice I stand a lot when I play. I rarely sit down. I find it rather cumbersome sitting down. I know there are lots of videos I've done sitting down, but my preference is to stand up and play. So it's good exercise by keeping on the move, and the fiddle is great for exercise. So that's another good reason to try and play every day if possible. So moving on now, we've got the key of G we've looked at. We looked at the key of D, of course. Now we haven't gone on to the G string before. Try, if you can, to play around with the key of D, but go down rather than up. In our previous lesson, lesson number 2, we were going up. But we didn't go down to the G string. That's because that ring finger has to go into a sort of sharpened position. I think we'll leave that for another lesson now. We've got plenty to work on now. We've got the scale of G. We can perhaps even do some simple recording and try and play this simple melody in unison as well. I think we'll leave it now, and I'll say cheerio. I hope that was useful, and I'll try and get another lesson recorded very, very soon for you. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye now.